Attention, attention, this is History Lost in Time. And welcome to episode 65 of the History Lost in Time podcast. This podcast is available in German and English and has presences on YouTube, Spotify, Podcast.de, Blue Sky and Instagram. There's also a music-based partner project on YouTube called HLIT AI Music. The topic of this episode: Berlin 1923. Hyperinflation has ravaged the country, separatism is brewing in the Rhineland, and extremists are pushing against the fledgling democracy from the fringes. At this moment a man takes the helm whom hardly anyone remembers today: Wilhelm Marx. He became the record-breaking Chancellor of the Weimar Republic, leading the country through 3 Reichstag elections. Political agenda and background: none. The sources that were used: Source 1. Bernd Braun, The Chancellors of the Weimar Republic, Kohlhammer Publishing House, Stuttgart 2013. Source 2. Hans Mommsen, Rise and Fall of the Weimar Republic, 1918-33, Ullstein Propyläen, Berlin, 1998. Source 3. Nadine Rossol, Benjamin Ziemann, Upheaval and Abyss, The Handbook of the Weimar Republic, WBG, Darmstadt 2021. And as usual, supplementary online sources. Wilhelm Marx was born on January 15, 1863 in Cologne, the son of a teacher. He had no connection whatsoever to the communist Karl Marx. Marx was a common name in the Rhineland, not as common as Schmidt or Müller, but still widespread. Wilhelm Marx had only one sister. The small family is said to have lived a very harmonious life. After graduating from high school, Marx began studying law in Bonn in 1881. His father died in 1882 when Wilhelm Marx was just 19 years old. Due to financial constraints, he had to complete his studies very quickly. He passed his first state examination in 1884 and his second in 1888. In 1889 he began working at the mortgage office and later at the land registry office in Simmern in the Hunsrück region. Marx's family home had been apolitical. Despite the Kulturkampf, the struggle between the Protestant Bismarck and the Catholic Church in the German Empire, the Marx household managed to reconcile both the Catholic Church and state authority. Marx only became politically active after hearing a speech by Windthorst, chairman of the Centre Party and an opponent of Bismarck, in 1887. He subsequently became active in Catholic associations. In 1894 he became a district judge in Elberfeld, now a district of Wuppertal. In 1896 he joined the board of the Centre Party there, becoming its chairman in 1899. In 1904 he became a judge at the regional court in Cologne. In 1907 he moved across the Rhine to Düsseldorf as a judge at the higher regional court. Afterward his professional career stalled due to his political involvement. He had been a member of the Prussian regional parliament since 1899. He was not a particularly good speaker and therefore remained largely in the background of the parliament. He was a strong advocate for denominational schools. In 1912 he became a member of the Reichstag. Since he only played a minor role in the parliamentary groups and the parliaments were located close to each other, he was able to hold both mandates. During the First World War he opposed excessive war aims. In 1917 he supported the Reichstag's peace resolution, which was backed by the later Weimar coalition partners, the Centre Party, the Social Democratic Party SPD, and the Progressive Party, the predecessor of the German Democratic Party DEP. In August 1917 he became a member of the Centre Party's parliamentary group leadership in the Reichstag, thus moving into the forefront of Centre Party politicians. Even then he was considered a non-polarizing compromise candidate, someone on whom many different factions could agree. This later served him well as Chancellor. The end of the war and the revolution of November 1918 deeply affected him, but he quickly rallied behind the Weimar Republic and supported the new form of government. In 1921 he became president of the regional court in Limburg an der Lahn. However, when several high-ranking Centre Party politicians died that same year, he suddenly rose to prominence, becoming parliamentary group leader in the Reichstag, and thus also a potential candidate for Chancellor. In 1922 he also became party chairman of the Centre Party. In Wilhelm Marx's case, the position came to him, not the other way around. Thanks to his conciliatory nature, he succeeded in keeping the party factions together and leading the party through various government coalitions and political crises. As the chaotic and fateful year of 1923 drew to a close, a chancellor was once again sought, the third that year. Initially, two candidates from the German People's Party DVP failed to secure the position, followed by an independent candidate, who also failed. On November 30th, Wilhelm Marx succeeded in forming a minority government comprised of the Centre Party, the German Democratic Party DDP, the DVP and the Bavarian People's Party BVP. On the agenda were the continuation of currency reform and the commencement of negotiations with the Western powers following the end of the Ruhr conflict. The previous Chancellor Stresemann remained in office as foreign minister in Marx's government. The previous finance minister Luther, who had reformed the Reichsmark, also retained his post and continued his work. For Marx personally, the chancellorship marked the end of his professional career. He retired from the judicial service. At 60, he was the second oldest chancellor of the Weimar Republic. Finance Minister Luther relied on emergency decrees and an enabling act that remained in effect until February 1924. Stabilizing the currency required some harsh measures, including job cuts in the civil service, the elimination of social benefits, and tax increases. Naturally, these measures were unpopular, leading to resistance in the Reichstag. Since the government lacked a majority, the Reichstag could have overturned the government's emergency decrees. To prevent this, President Ebert dissolved the Reichstag and called for new elections. Source 2 states on pages 234 and following: through the dissolution of the Reichstag and the snap elections, the Marx cabinet remained in office for the time being. The Reich President and the Reich government agreed in their intention not to allow any changes to the emergency decrees, and thus no parliamentary intervention in the cabinet's stabilization policy. The tendency to form minority governments of the bourgeois center was by no means primarily attributable to the political weight of the fringe parties, especially the KPD and the DNVP. Rather, it was based on the fact that the ministerial bureaucracy, the influential bourgeois interest groups, and the Reichswehr rejected stabilization on the basis of the Grand Coalition. The Reichstag elections of May 1924 significantly shifted the balance of power in the Reichstag and made forming a government even more difficult. The biggest loser was the Weimar coalition of 1919. The SPD, which had previously garnered 39.5% of the vote, thanks to the merger with the USPD, the Independent Social Democratic Party, fell to 20.5%. While the SPD had thus more or less maintained its own result from 1920, it had lost all of the USPD's votes. These voters largely migrated to the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany, which jumped from 2.1 to 12.6% and suddenly became a force to be reckoned with in the Reichstag. The Centre Party was able to roughly hold its own, finishing with 13.4%. The DDP fell from 8.3 to 5.7%. The BVP dropped from 4.4 to 3.2%. And the DVP, the German People's Party, fell from 13.9 to 9.2%. Among the election winners, besides the Communists, were also the parties from the far right. The DNVP, the German National People's Party, jumped from 15 to 19.5%, and the NSFP, the National Socialist Freedom Party, the successor to the NSDAP, garnered 6.6%. With 472 seats in parliament, a majority therefore required 237 mandates. However, the Marx minority government, comprised of the Centre Party, the BVP, the DDP and the DVP, only held 154 seats. It thus needed either the Social Democrats, which had 100 seats, or the DNVP, which had 95 seats, to pass legislation. Cooperation with the KPD or NSFP was impossible. The leftist parties suffered significant losses in this election. The fringe parties, the DNVP, the NSFP and the KPD, made substantial gains. A parliamentary majority was only possible through a grand coalition from the SPD to the DVP. A highly unlikely outcome due to massive differences between the left wing of the SPD and the right wing of the DVP. As one of the election's winners, the DNVP entered the negotiations for a new government with considerable confidence. However, the DNVP's demands were so excessive that the other parties could not support them. The BVP withdrew from the Marx cabinet. In the end, the only option was the formation of a minority cabinet comprised of the Centre Party, the DDP and the DVP, which commanded less than 30% of the parliamentary support. Nevertheless, the Marx government succeeded in completing the currency reform without interference from the Reichstag. In August 1924, the Marx government also achieved a foreign policy success. Negotiations with the Western powers led to a renegotiation of German reparations in the Dawes Plan. This plan was drafted by the US financial expert and later Vice President Charles G. Dawes and named after him. The plan came into effect on September 1, 1924 and included the following main points. 1. In 1924, Germany was to pay 1 billion gold marks in reparations. This amount was to increase to 2.5 billion gold marks per year by 1928 and then remain at that level. The total amount of reparations remained at 132 billion gold marks. 2. The Reichsbank and the Reichsbahn, the German National Railway, were internationalized and converted into joint stock companies. The Reichsbank's board of directors now consisted of 7 Germans and 7 non-Germans. 3. Reparations were to consist of 55% cash payments and 45% in-kind contributions. 4. Germany was opened to foreign loans. By 1929, loans totaling 21 billion marks had flowed into the country, enabling the economic boom of the late 1920s. 5. In return, the French and Belgians withdrew from the Ruhr area by the summer of 1925 and restored Germany's full sovereignty in this region. In France, the plan was rejected by the political right, who believed it would jeopardize the achievements of the Treaty of Versailles. However, since France itself had been mired in a financial crisis since the beginning of 1924, the country was ultimately willing to compromise. In Germany, resistance came primarily from the DNVP, but industry and agriculture exerted so much pressure that the DNVP ultimately approved the agreement in the Reichstag. It was precisely heavy industry, which had been particularly promoted by the Marx government and profited from the loans, that supported the conclusion of this treaty. The plan, however, had problems. 1. No end date for the payments was specified. 2. The internationalization of the Reichsbank and the Reichsbahn severely restricted Germany's sovereignty and opened new avenues for conflict. 3. It was doubtful whether Germany would be able to pay 2.5 billion gold marks annually. This was wishful thinking. 4. The economic upswing was heavily dependent on foreign loans and unemployment remained high. While Marx's one-sided approach to economic stimulus benefited heavy industry and generated good business there, it came at the expense of other sectors. Short-term growth was thus prioritized over long-term strengthening. All of this led to irresolvable political strife. In October 1924, President Ebert dissolved the Reichstag once again, forcing Germans to go to the polls for the second time in a year. In the December 1924 elections, the political center was strengthened while the extremes weakened. The SPD rose from 20.5 to 26%. The DNVP made slight gains, increasing from 19.5 to 20.5%. The approval of the Dawes Plan had thus not harmed the party. The Centre Party and the Bavarian People's Party (BVP) also made small gains, while the liberal parties, the German People's Party (DVP) and the German Democratic Party (DDP), suffered slight losses. The biggest losers in the election were the extremist parties. The Communists fell from 12.6 to 8.9%, and the new Nazi replacement party, the NSFB, the National Socialist Freedom Movement, dropped from 6.6 to 3.0%. The Reichstag now had 493 members, meaning a majority required 247 seats. The minority government led by Marx, consisting of the Centre Party, the DVP and the DDP, won 152 seats. The BVP held 19 seats, the SPD 131 and the DNVP 103. Theoretically, a grand coalition with the SPD or a right-wing bourgeois bloc government with the DNVP was possible. Marx attempted to form a grand coalition with the SPD, but this failed due to the DVP's desire to bring the DNVP into the fold. Marx ultimately gave up and remained in office only in a caretaker capacity until January 15, 1925. The new government was formed by Finance Minister Luther. But wait a minute, didn't I say Marx was a record-breaking chancellor? November 23 to January 25 isn't even a year and a half. True. But what seems almost unthinkable today happened twice back then. Not only Chancellor Müller, but also Chancellor Marx had two separate terms in office. So just be patient. After resigning as Chancellor, Marx received an honorary doctorate in theology from the University of Bonn. This, however, was his only major success during this period. For 2 months he replaced the SPD politician Otto Braun as Prussian Prime Minister, but then had to relinquish the office back to him. Marx is probably best known today for his participation in the 1925 presidential election. When President Ebert died unexpectedly, a number of candidates competed in the first round. The SPD fielded the Prussian Prime Minister Otto Braun, who came in second with 29% of the vote. Marx, supported by the Centre Party, came in third with 14.5%. First place went to the DNVP and DVP candidate Jarres, who garnered a respectable 38.8%. In the second round, the Weimar parties agreed on Marx as a compromise candidate. The right-wing parties, however, surprisingly backed the former Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. The DVP and the Bavarian People's Party (BVP) refused to support Marx. The DVP wavered between Marx and Hindenburg, while the BVP refused to support a candidate backed by the SPD. Even if it meant Catholic Bavaria had to support a Prussian Protestant. In the second round of voting, Hindenburg narrowly won with 48.3% of the vote, ahead of Marx with 45.3%. The KPD candidate Thälmann came in third, hopelessly behind. Source 2 states the following about this election on pages 293 and 94. The bourgeois right contested the election campaign with the argument that the Centre Party leader Marx was a prisoner of the Social Democrats who were selling out the Republic. Hindenburg was portrayed as the guardian of the national interests of all patriotic Germans, standing above party politics. It was noteworthy that the BVP voted for the Protestant Hindenburg, even though up to a third of its core electorate did not follow the party line. The KPD, which had stuck to Thälmann's candidacy against the advice of the Comintern, was unable to improve its position compared to the first round of voting. However, it became apparent that both the DDP and the Centre Party suffered considerable losses in votes. The narrow majority for Hindenburg was therefore by no means solely attributable to the BVP. The elections made it clear that anti-social democratic sentiments had played a central role in the behavior of middle-class voters, and that they largely coincided with the rejection of the parliamentary system by large segments of the middle class. In January 1926, Marx joined the cabinet of his successor Luther as Minister of Justice and the occupied territories. When the Luther government collapsed later that year, the mayor of Cologne and later post-war Chancellor Konrad Adenauer initially attempted to form a grand coalition, but this failed due to the German People's Party DVP, which wanted to continue working with the German National People's Party DNVP rather than the Social Democratic Party SPD. Once again, Marx remained the only compromise candidate. However, he was not particularly enthusiastic about this reappointment. In source 1, he is quoted on page 14 as saying, "Now they have found the fool again." After his first term as Chancellor from November 23 to January 25, Marx led the government again in a second term from May 26 to June 28. No one else served longer as head of government in the Weimar Republic than Wilhelm Marx, and he is the only Weimar Chancellor to have served longer than two post-war chancellors, namely the short-lived Chancellors Ludwig Erhard and Kurt Georg Kiesinger. Marx not only succeeded his own successor, but also served as Chancellor under his election opponent Paul von Hindenburg. Initially, he continued to lead a minority government consisting of the Centre Party, the DVP, the DDP and the BVP, as the left liberal DDP and the Centre Party opposed the German National People's Party DNVP joining the government. A defining issue of 1926 was the proposal by the SPD and KPD to expropriate the German princes without compensation. The two left-wing parties found no support for this proposal from either the right or the center, widening the gap between the SPD and the centrist parties. Voter turnout for this referendum ultimately reached only 36.4%, significantly below the required 50%. The Marx government was therefore able to disregard the proposal from the Social Democrats and Communists. A foreign policy success for Germany was its admission to the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, as a full member in September 1926. This success was primarily due to the work of Foreign Minister Stresemann. However, in the autumn of 1926, the opposition succeeded in passing several laws against the government through the Reichstag. Another attempt was made to integrate the SPD into the government. This attempt failed, however, because the SPD demanded the resignation of the Marx cabinet as a precondition for negotiations. When Philipp Scheidemann of the SPD then delivered a fiery speech in the Reichstag in December 1926, addressing the secret armaments cooperation between the Reichswehr and the Soviet Red Army, which placed Germany in foreign and security policy difficulties, the basis for talks between the SPD and the centrist parties was destroyed. The SPD, DNVP, KPD and the Nazi movement introduced a vote of no confidence against the Marx government, and the government collapsed. But President Hindenburg once again tasked Marx with forming a government. In January 27, the bourgeois bloc government was formed. The Centre Party, the German Democratic Party DDP, the German People's Party DVP, and the Bavarian People's Party BVP now worked together with the German National People's Party DNVP. Marx was not enthusiastic about this constellation, but nevertheless led the government. This severely damaged his standing within his own party, as he was generally considered a centrist, not a member of the right wing. The trade union wing of the Centre Party in particular turned against him. The DDP was also shocked, even though it continued to support the government. The DNVP was now represented in the government with the offices of Vice-Chancellor, Justice, Interior, Food, Agriculture and Transport. The year 1927 was more or less the calmest of the Weimar Republic, at least politically. For once, there were no major crises and the economy flourished thanks to the Dawes Plan and foreign loans. Unemployment fell to 500,000 and the Marx government was able to work undisturbed. In July 1927, the bourgeois coalition government passed the Unemployment Insurance Act, thus establishing another pillar in the German social welfare system. However, no one could have foreseen that this law would unleash enormous political dynamite just 2 years later. Due to persistent criticism of the DNVP ministers in the bourgeois bloc government by the Reichsbanner Schwarz-Rot-Gold, Marx resigned from this organization. His inner circle interpreted this as a personal defection from the Republic. At the turn of the year 1927-28, the internal party conflicts surrounding Marx escalated. The Chancellor was increasingly undermined by his own party and the bourgeois bloc government dissolved. In March 1928, the Reichstag was dissolved and new elections were called. Source 2 states, although Hindenburg and Stresemann explicitly advocated for the continuation of the Marx cabinet, its resignation stemmed from the internal exhaustion of the governing coalition without any intervention from the parliamentary opposition. The 1928 elections were thus the third elections that Marx experienced as Chancellor. This time the left wing made significant gains while the center and the right suffered losses. The SPD rose by 3.8% to 29.8%, making it by far the strongest party. The Centre Party and the Bavarian People's Party BVP lost 2.2 points, landing at 15.1%. The German National People's Party DNVP suffered heavy losses, dropping 6.2 points to just 14.3%. The downward trend continued for the German People's Party DVP and the German Democratic Party DDP, which both lost 1.4 and 1.5 points respectively, ending at 8.7 and 4.8%. The right-wing Economic Party garnered 4.5%, the Communist Party of Germany KPD rose by 1.7 points to 10.6%, the Nazi Party NSDAP received only 2.6%. The Weimar coalition thus received approximately 46% of the vote, its strongest support since 1919. Forming a new government without the SPD was virtually impossible. A renewed bourgeois coalition was mathematically impossible. The SPD politician Hermann Müller ultimately formed the Grand Coalition, which would last until 1930. Wilhelm Marx was burned out by the time of his resignation in 1928. He relinquished the party chairmanship in December 28 and remained in the Reichstag as a regular member of parliament until July 32. He gradually withdrew from politics. When the Nazis seized power, they allowed Marx to live more or less undisturbed. However, he was stripped of his Reichschancellor's pension, which forced him to live very modestly in Bonn. In 1943, he moved to Neustadt an der Wied to escape Allied air raids. He did not return to his hometown until the spring of '46, where he joined the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union. He died in Bonn on August 5, 1946, at the age of 84. He was buried in Cologne. A few words about his private life. In 1891, he married Johanna Verkoyen. They had 3 sons, Wilhelm, Albert and Joseph, and a daughter named Gertrud. The marriage was said to be very happy. In 1915, his son Albert was killed on the Eastern Front at the age of only 21. Just a year earlier, Wilhelm Marx had strongly advocated for Albert to be allowed to volunteer for service. Johanna Verkoyen survived her husband by only 2 weeks in 1946. A few finishing words. Wilhelm Marx remains a figure of quiet desperation in German history. He was not a rousing speaker or a man of grand gestures, but a conscientious lawyer who steered the Weimar Republic through some turbulent years as well as some calmer ones. Although his name is often overshadowed today by more radical ideologies, it was he, as the longest-serving Chancellor of the Republic, who proved that consistency and a willingness to compromise are the true pillars of democracy. His life reminds us that history is not only written by the loudest voices, but also by those who work behind the scenes, bearing responsibility for the whole. Thank you. This was History Lost in Time.